Hello, my name is djack and I'm a Gallup certified strength performance coach. Basically what I do is I focus on finding more of you to get more for you. Today what I want to talk about is one of the primary tools that I use in my coaching, the Clifton StrengthsFinder. What I want to do is explain how it affects your brain, very specifically. Neuroscience or neuropsychology has taught us that we have several areas involved in our brain, and they all have different and specific roles in how we process information and how we create abilities and how we just kind of become who we are. And so today I want to focus on the relationship between two of those areas, the limbic system and the frontal cortex. Not to oversimplify, but to make this a very short, concrete example, the limbic system is instinctual and the frontal cortex is rational. That's oversimplified. There's much more to it than that, but in very basic terms, that's what's going on. The limbic system, in other words, takes in stimuli, and the frontal cortex reasons with that stimuli and decides how to respond to it. So both are incredibly important and valuable. However, the limbic system should not be left in charge of making every single decision. Putting that immediate reaction into behaviors can come with some complications. So for example, if someone is acting as a stimuli, causing the limbic system to react with fear and the frontal cortex doesn't know what to do with that information, then we would all be left in complete fear of lions at the zoo because we don't understand what a fence is. So let me draw a really bad picture of a brain here. Okay, so right in here is the limbic system. Okay, it's attached to our brain stem. Up here in the front is our frontal cortex. And the limbic system is what processes stimuli first. So you walk up to the zoo and you see a lion, your limbic system starts to get a little bit afraid. It starts to get anxious. It wants to fight or flight or freeze. Those are the responses that the limbic system is kind of capable of doing. But because we've all been to a zoo, or because we understand what a zoo is, our frontal cortex tells us there are fences, there are blockades. Sometimes there's really deep ravines where that to keep the animals from getting to us. Okay, so we understand that at the zoo, because our frontal cortex tells us that our limbic system can chill out. One very interesting thing about the limbic system: if you are under a lot of stress, a lot of emotional strain, a lot of maybe post-traumatic stress, because it's so close to the brainstem, you can feel that stress in your back. And sometimes a chiropractic appointment can kind of get that stress a little bit released. But we process all of that right there, kind of at the bottom of our brain, moving in to our spinal cord, where the rest of our nervous system starts to make connections with our brain. So the limbic system is incredibly important. The problem is it doesn't have higher functioning skills. That happens in our frontal cortex. This is important to know because the way that the limbic system communicates with the frontal cortex is through language. So once we understand what a fence is, if we go to the zoo and our friend is there and they say, hey, there's a fence, don't worry about it. If we know what a fence is, we're cool. If we don't have the language to understand what a fence is and how it provides safety, we're going to be fearful until we see that, that jumbled mess of iron keeping that lion from getting us. So the way that our frontal cortex is able to grasp a hold of content or ideas is through language. So what the Clifton StrengthsFinder is doing is it's providing language to what the research behind the Clifton StrengthsFinder aims to get at, which is our innate talents, our naturally reoccurring thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. We're doing them naturally, not fully in our limbic system, but there are different neural patterns that come out of the limbic system, and these pathways are the strongest ways that we can take stimuli, process it, and give it to our frontal cortex so that then we can rationalize with it. What the Clifton StrengthsFinder is doing is giving names to these, okay? So for me, it's through learning. So my number one is learner. So the best way for me to take an idea that I can't grasp but I can feel some heaviness to is to read or listen to content or to go through experiences. Because as I'm doing that, my limbic system and my frontal cortex is able to make connections. Another way for me is through the talent of restorative. So if I'm faced with a problem, I've got a lot of neural pathways between my limbic system and my frontal cortex for me to process what's going on. And because that neural pathway is so strong, I like it when there's problems because I know what to do with that. Not because I've sat around and practiced, but because during the development of me becoming a human being, that neural pathway was developed for whatever reason. The Clifton StrengthsFinder prides itself in being able to add a name to that so that now my frontal cortex can start to think about it, be intentional with it, strategize with it, understand that problems are important to the way that I process information in the world. So that relationship is really important when you're thinking about stimulus and response. So every day you're going to be faced with some sort of stimulus. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, wonderful. All of these things that happen to us starts to process through our limbic system. So this stimulus comes into our environment. We are left to have a response. Oftentimes, if we are in an environment that we are not familiar with, or we're uncomfortable with, or there's just certain things about the environment that we're unable to really just describe or add language to, what's happening here is in between the stimulus and response, we're trying to grasp with what's going on. If we don't have a way to process through our limbic system to get that to our frontal cortex, we're left to respond like the limbic system, which is fight, flight, or freeze. So the response is left to our innate responses. One of my favorite phrases in all the Gout material, and if I've worked with you before, you've probably heard me say this 100 times, but when it's describing empathy, one of the things that empathy, the talent of empathy is able to do is make the visceral explicit. So if you take that phrase and you think limbic system, it's visceral, it's kind of gray, really, really strong, really, really powerful, but it's not yet explicit. The talent of empathy is able to take what people aren't saying and create vocabulary with it. Give it back to them in such a way that they can process it or work with it. Make it objective. I love that phrase. Make the visceral explicit. Those of you with the talent of empathy, I'm totally jealous of that ability. But what's going on is in this area here, these things aren't defined. They're not concrete. So we're left to just respond impulsively or respond in ways that we don't really understand. So as we take this and we start to add words to it, like command or relator, how about activator, achiever, let's do one more, how about input, okay? These are all examples of the 34 talents that are in the Clifton StrengthsFinder. As we've got these words, now we can look at what those mean. And as we're reading the paragraphs, as we're looking at the needs and contributions, as we're doing activities with these words, we start to have some way of stopping that immediate stimulus to response. We can stop and think. And as we're doing that with these words, what we're doing is we're giving that information instead of to our direct response. We can take a time out here and give it to our frontal cortex, where we can reason and rationalize and process and think and come up with an objective response. Without this, whatever we've always done is what we're going to do. In order to change the way that we think or enhance the way that we do things or excel at a very high level, turning those talents into strengths, we've got to have some sort of way to communicate that information not only from our limbic system to our frontal cortex, but to others. And then when they give us feedback, all that information is going into our frontal cortex so that we can then process it. So that's what the Clifton StrengthsFinder is able to do. If you look at other tools, what the StrengthsFinder has that other tools don't, and the reason why I ended up choosing it is because they've got 34 different ways of looking at those connections between the limbic system and the frontal cortex. Many other ones have maybe 4 or 5. I think Myers-Briggs, what's it got, like, they have like 8, something like that. I don't know for sure. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But the StrengthsFinder's got 34 different ways of looking at those connections and naming them. And they come with not only paragraphs and descriptions, but action plans and ways of making this dialogue within ourselves, it expands it. It gives us ways to give much more information to our frontal cortex. So your brain on the Clifton StrengthsFinder is going to make this immediate response less immediate, which is good if you're wanting to rationalize. So instead of just going directly from stimulus to response, you're able to add a step in this process. The frontal cortex. It is able to then process that information. So you come here, and then you go up here. Now you can decide what response you want. You can become able to think through and process your information in a way that is incredibly unique to you. Again, the results that you have if you end up taking it, or you have taken the Clifton StrengthsFinder, your results in the order that they are in are 1 in 33 million. So I think there's right at 14 million people that have taken it. So statistically speaking, nobody that's taken the Clifton StrengthsFinder has the exact same top 5 in the same order as you do. So this process is going to be incredibly unique, and the impact that you can make is incredibly unique. So long as you're able to have stimulus, have information about yourself and the way that you process information and stimuli, so that you can then respond as intentionally and specifically as you can. And as you go through that process, you're creating strengths. You're creating areas in which you excel in a highly unique way, nearly perfectly and consistently. So I encourage everyone to take the Clifton StrengthsFinder. If you'd like to do that, you can go to www.gallupstrengthscenter.com. If you have any questions once you get your results, if you have any things that you would like to talk about or process, feel free to email djack@jackfundamentals.com. We can talk back and forth. We can hop on the phone. We can even meet if you're in the Louisville area. Because this information is really, really important for people to understand how their brains are working. So again, gallupstrengthscenter.com, email me, djack@jackfundamentals.com, and thank you so much for all the support the videos have been getting, the sharing, the commenting, the liking. I just really enjoy it, and I hope you all are enjoying it as well. Thank you very much, and have a great day.